Good afternoon and welcome back to this week's episode of Since I Was Young, a podcast dedicated to all things Heart of Midlothian. This afternoon we will be discussing the beginning of the Derek McInnes era, which obviously began at Tynecastle with I want to call it convincing, but I'm not entirely sure that it was, but the scoreline was certainly convincing as we ran out 4-1 winners in our opening tie of the Premier Sports Cup group stage. So we'll be diving into that as well as kind of the fallout from that, the squad selection, and a few questions that have been, have risen since the game. But yes, without further ado, folks, as per usual, before we get dived into the nitty gritty content, you can find all of our socials in the description. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Spotify as well. I've mentioned it this week. It's happy days. But yeah, you can leave all your comments and such in the comment section of the YouTube video and just reach out to us across the socials because you know where to find us at SIWI Pod across a majority of our platforms. But yes, with all that said and done, John, as I said at the start there, a 4-1 victory against a Neil Lennon Dunfermline side. Not a bad way to start the season, was it?
It really wasn't. No, I think Hearts came out of the blocks, absolutely stormed out of the blocks. You know, the goal within 3 minutes by James Wilson. Shetland almost had a hat trick. Of course, that tap in by Wilson was off the back of a lovely curled shot by Shanks that just came off the post. Very positive start. Obviously, like you said, it wasn't smooth sailing from there for most of the game. I think the 4-1 scoreline probably does flatter us a wee bit, but delighted to get off to a winning start this year. You know, like after the last campaign and the amount of pressure that's on them this year to perform, to run out 4-1 winners in that first game, it sets a decent marker down for the games to come.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the best place to start is with the sort of thoughts prior to the game. I obviously felt, we spoke about it last week briefly. I was looking forward to it, obviously, because of the whole new era, the way they're building it up and all that. But it's easy to kind of look back on it now with hindsight. But prior to the game, I was thinking, right, we're going to turn up, and if we turn up, we're going to turn them over, based off of what I've said and heard coming out from the club, and obviously how pre-season's gone. I think you can say this pre-season has been a lot more beneficial than previous ones have been. It seems to just be a lot more organised and a bit more sort of the ties that we played were a bit more appropriate based off of the opposition that we were going to be coming up against in the opening ties. But yeah, the obviously the pre-game expectation I think was that everybody kind of felt like that this is a good tie, albeit Dunfermline are a decent side at their level. They've not fully got the squad together that they want for the coming season. Lennon basically said that before and after the game. He was talking about the fact that they still need bodies in the door. So, it wasn't the complete Dunfermline that Lennon wants it to be, but it was still going to be a tough tie. And I think maybe people kind of got swept away with the new era stuff and the new signings and all that. But I think in reality, it was going to be a tricky game, and Derek McInnes sort of said as much prior to kickoff. He mentioned how difficult Dunfermline will make it, but we wanted to play with that high press and we wanted to play with that sort of front foot mentality, which obviously McInnes wants Tynecastle to be a place, and I'm sure he said in his programme notes that I'd heard about that he wanted Tynecastle to be a place that people don't enjoy coming to. He wants it to be the only place that he wants people to enjoy coming to is the Hearts fans. He doesn't want other teams and other fans to enjoy it, which is a nice thing and a good way to sort of put it at the start of the campaign. But before we kind of talk through the early events of the game, I know you mentioned the goals and stuff there. There was discussion and there was obviously a lot of hype prior to the game. And then the team news dropped and a lot of people, as Hearts fans do, were brought back down to earth and thought, well, that looks very similar to last season's 11. So, where's the change? Where's the, what's going to happen? Are we going to see more of the same? Obviously, there was only two debutants in the game against Dunfermline, that being Claudio Braga, who was utilised on the left wing, and Oisin McEntee, who was played at right back. Two players playing in positions that, for me, they're not natural in. It's clear Oisin McEntee is versatile and can cover at right back, and I don't think he was particularly bad, but he certainly looked like a player and I don't want to use the expression too early in the season because I hate it, but it was a square peg in a round hole scenario. That was the vibe that I got from McKenty. I mean, he did an all right job. I don't think he was bad, but you can tell that it's not his natural position. Claudio Braga, the other one on the left hand side, I thought he looked all right, but again, there were spells where I thought he wants to be through the middle. He wants to be, getting involved in the centre, drifting inside, which is fine. And I felt, we'll go through it. But there was another squad selection, and you'll know where I'm going with this, that people looked at, and I saw tweets and posts on Facebook and kickback, etc., days before the Dunfermline game. And I can't remember them off the top of my head to reference the people. I'm not going to name drop people, but there were lots of comments saying if we line up with a starting 11 against Dunfermline and Alan Forrest is starting, what have we done? That's ridiculous. Why is he still starting for Hearts, etc. Now, I'm going to get this out there early because everybody knows, and you know, my thoughts on Alan Forrest. If you've listened to this for long enough, you know I'm a fan of his. I feel like it's that whole adage of you can't fix every problem in one transfer window. Alan Forrest is not a bad football player. He has moments in games where he's maybe not at the races or he does the wrong thing or his decision making isn't quite right. But I just feel like he's the boo boy at the moment, and I feel like it's a bit, I'm not going to say ridiculous because people are entitled to their own opinions, but to suggest that, if Alan Forrest is starting a game in 2025, then we fucked it. Derek McInnes started Alan Forrest because he had a good pre-season. He's impressed in pre-season, as has James Wilson. James Wilson impressed in pre-season, and Derek McInnes spoke about him and how much of a fan he is of James Wilson. And nobody bats an eyelid about that, despite the fact that we've brought in Cabangu and Braga as new strikers and Kizaridis as well as a new forward option. But nobody bats an eyelid because James Wilson's playing ahead of those new players. Alan Forrest was starting at right wing because we don't have another option. Let's be honest. Like that's the reality of it. We don't have another natural right winger at this current moment. Obviously, I think is it Karjota, the winger that's due to arrive relatively soon, as well as Kabori. They're both on the way in. They can both play off the right. But in that moment, Alan Forrest was the option that was chosen because he's had a good pre-season. And I feel like people just don't like him, they don't understand whatever. That's fine. Do you know what? You don't have to be as much of a fan of him as I am. That's fine. I'm not recruiting for Alan Forrest fan club members because I know I'd probably be quite alone on that. But I just feel like the reaction to a name on a team sheet in the first game of the season, when everybody's high as anything about the fact that Hearts are back, it's a sunny day in Gorgie, it's a brilliant day for football, and then you see a name on the team sheet and suddenly you get people going, oh, what a fucking disaster, why is he this, why is that, it gets me every time. And I know, like, it maybe sounds like I'm ranting or whatever, but I kind of am. But yeah, I don't understand the Alan Forrest agenda that some people seem to have against him, but I certainly don't, and I was delighted to see him starting.
I was considerably less concerned about Alan Forrest starting the game, and you're absolutely right about his pre-season form. He was tremendous in pre-season. He's quite obviously left quite an impression on Derek McInnes and his staff. He also had a really electric, white-hot 4 or 5 game spell at the end of last season. He's coming off a pretty hot streak there. I feel like it only makes sense to let him sort of have enough of a chance to prove that he still has that in his locker after the summer before you start kind of throwing him out and playing whoever else we might have. Like you said quite accurately, Alan, we don't really have many options out on the right side. So yeah, it's an overreaction. I think a massive overreaction. And even, I mean, I was in Madrid over the weekend, so I didn't see the game, and I couldn't get, which I was unhappy about. I couldn't even get audio access because I was outside the UK. I tried to listen to the game on BBC, and it said that I couldn't listen to it because of licensing rights. Utter bullshit, quite frankly. I pay a subscription fee for audio of games. I should get fucking audio of the games. This is 2025, and it's on the internet. That's a rant for another time. I wasn't really paying close attention to the game as it was happening, but when I was on Blue Sky and stuff, and I was reading some of the kind of vitriol that Alan Forrest was getting from some folk there, I was like, "Oof, it sounds like he's having a mare." And when I finally got around to watching the game, that what was notable to me was the lack of eye rolls or head shakes that I had when it came to him. Like I don't think there was anybody on Saturday that had a really crap game. To be honest, everyone was at least okay, and Alan Forrest was okay. It wasn't great. His deliveries into the box were a bit lacking at times, I felt. But his energy was high. He got into good positions. He caused a lot of problems for the defenders of Dunfermline, which is also a massive thing that you need from your forward line. It's not all about making crosses and shooting and scoring goals. If football was that simple, then anybody could do it. Yeah, I was more concerned by McKenty at right back because I had never seen him play for Hearts before, and I was concerned that might be because right back as well was a massive, massive problem for us last year, as you know. So I was like, is this going to be a case of here we go again? I know that I think Borkovic, he was struggling a bit for fitness, so I guess he wasn't able to play the whole 90. But as you always say, Alan, if you're fit enough for the bench, you should be fit enough to play an hour from the start. So McKenty was more of a concern, and even Milne as well at left back. Before the game, my concern was, can he step up into this role and make this position his as a starter? I think he certainly did. He had a fantastic game, but yeah, the Forest hate was overblown and rather unfair, I felt.
Yeah, and I think you kind of mentioned the other player that I wanted to kind of touch on, and that is O'Shane McKenty playing at right back. We spoke just briefly off air before we came on about it, and it's one of those things Derek McInnes has often talked about, having that physical presence in the team and having that size in the squad, and we don't really have a lot of that, or certainly the starting 11 against Dunfermline didn't really have that physical edge to it that I'm sure McInnes is looking for. But that'll come with game time and with new arrivals hopefully coming in to kind of bolster that. But McKenty was brought in and played at right back because, and I think Derek McInnes described him as a raiding right back, I think was the word that he used in terms of that high press and getting in the faces of the opposition. And I don't necessarily think he was bad at right back, but like I said to you off air just before we started, he doesn't come across as a natural in that position, and I think it's clear that he's not a natural in that position, which is understandable. We've signed him to be a midfielder, but Borkovic was carrying a knock through pre-season, and his minutes have kind of been managed in pre-season. So that kind of explains that as to why he wasn't involved off the start. He came on later in the game when we changed the system, and I thought he looked all right, but yeah, I think obviously Adam Forrester watched the game from the stands. There's potentially a loan move that might be there for him, which I've just heard this afternoon. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, it's not ideal when you're starting the first game of the season with players playing out with their natural positions. But like you say, I don't think anyone had a particularly bad game. I think at times we looked okay, and at times, particularly at the start of the game, we could just kind of segue into the game itself. You briefly mentioned it just at the start there. We started the game very well. We had a chance in the opening minutes prior to the goal that we scored, and it was courtesy of Alan Forrest coming down the right wing and laying the ball back across the goal, and Shanklin gets a foot on it, but obviously doesn't get enough power on it, and it's just sort of side-footed at the goalkeeper. But you could see from that moment, that intensity that they want to play with. They want to play that front foot forward football, and it was nice to see that so early on. And then obviously the goal comes not long after that. Shanklin picks it up again after we win the ball back from the high press down the left hand side. I think it was maybe Milne actually, or Braga, one of the two. I thought those two linked up quite well down the left on occasions, which is another positive sign. But yeah, the ball kind of breaks for Shanklin, and he is probably about 30 yards out, maybe 25, 30 yards out.
Yeah.
And he shapes to hit a shot, and it comes back off the post, and James Wilson is with that striker's instinct that he seems to be developing and just being in the right place at the right time to put it away. It's a perfect start. James Wilson is a player that a lot of people, again, across sort of social platforms that have been sort of browsing across the summer window, a lot of people have sort of said about James Wilson, and I've had my opinions on him as well. I like him a lot. I think he's a very, very talented football player. Should we be relying on an 18-year-old? maybe not. But you know what? If Derek McInnes likes him and feels he can get more out of him, then if he starts ahead of the likes of Cabangu, then I'm not going to complain. If Derek McInnes believes he's the right player to play, then he'll play. And if he continues to score goals, then he'll play more. And that will only help with his value and his long-term or his longer-term future. But yeah, I really liked James Wilson against Dunfermline. I thought don't get me wrong, there were points where he drifted in and out of the game, but a lot of the players did, which I think is a symptom of that high press and that aggressive kind of
Yeah,
full-on nature. You can't do that for a 45-minute period without
I
having a
think
gap at some point.
if I can just jump in there, Alan.
Of course, yeah.
Sorry,
No,
I
crack on.
think the weather. I think necessarily played a factor there. I mean, James Wilson's an 18-year-old Scottish boy. He's never seen the sun before. These were some insane temperatures that he was playing in. So I think that was a massive factor in the sort of way that the game sort of died out after the first goal. It was by no means a bore fest, but yeah, players did get slightly more sloppy as the game went on. But in that heat, I mean, the starting lineup had a core of Scots. It was 6 Scots players, and I think you had an Irishman, an Englishman, 2 Englishmen technically. I guess Benny's English, isn't he? So, and you also had your Australian who's used to it, but like those Scottish guys and the Englishmen, they're not really necessarily used to these kinds of temperatures.
Yeah.
So I think that probably would have affected energy levels, especially with how quickly we broke out of the starting gates.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it kind of leads me on to the point that I wanted to make next. In terms of the flow of the game, I thought we did very well for the opening sort of 20 minutes, and then the water break came in, and I obviously totally understand the need for these things, especially when the temperatures, like you say, it was ridiculous at Tynecastle on Saturday by all accounts. And yeah, the water break came, and maybe that halted the momentum that we had a little bit. Maybe that allowed Dunfermline to sort of gather their thoughts and kind of settle a wee bit. And yeah, the Dunfermline goal comes not long after that. I think it was about half an hour into the game, I think, off the top of my head, maybe just before half time, actually. It might have been 40 minutes or so. I watched the Dunfermline goal a few times because a lot of people said, oh, Benny's at fault, or, the defence is at fault, Xander Clark should have got to it, etc. My only sort of thought on it, and the only thing that I'll say about it, the ball, we have an opportunity to clear the ball twice prior to it even reaching the Dunfermline player. Benny gets it, and as much as we love Benny getting the ball when he's under pressure and turning into space and finding a way out of it, he was pretty much given the ball while a Dunfermline player was on his back. They pressed Benny because they know if we can get the ball off him in that position, we're through. And that's what happened. They nicked the ball off him just by doubling up on him and pressing him, and then he loses the ball. And it again, though, there are opportunities for us to block it. I think it was Kent maybe that kind of got turned a little bit, and then the shot was a decent shot from the lad Cooper. I don't take anything away from it. Maybe Xander could have seen it, but I don't know if he sees it late, or I've not seen an angle where where I can kind of clarify that. But it was a good finish. An error of our own making, and I think this is the point that I want to kind of make on that. We last season, and I think this is the point again, a lot of people on social media were saying, same old Hearts, give the team one chance and they'll score it. Echoes of last season, etc., etc. And they're right on that. But again, like I said, the starting 11, aside from 2 players, were all here last season. So these are little errors that need to be eradicated from the game, and I'm sure Derek McInnes will be drilling it into them that you cannot give an opposition a chance like that, because they will take it. It's all right if we've scored 2 or 3 goals in the first 20 minutes before that, which arguably we could have, but we didn't. We created a few chances and didn't take them, and then they get one and they score it, and that just sums it up for me. But yeah, I refuse to blame an individual for Hearts. I think it was a collective fault from maybe 3 or 4 players involved.
I do think that if anyone was at fault, it wasn't necessarily Benny Beningame, like a lot of people seem to be saying. I feel that Kent was probably more at fault than Beningame was, and that's not to put the blame on him. At the end of the day, like you say, Benny was being pressed pretty hard. They knew that if they could win the ball back in that position, they had a very good chance to get through, which they did. I do feel that Xander Clark should have done more. I dare say Craig Gordon would have stopped that, but that's just me.
I was waiting for that.
It was
a bingo card.
Yeah, the shot was struck from some distance, and it didn't have all that much power on it. It was well placed though, and at the end of the day, two teams are playing. It was a well taken and well struck shot. I do think that a goalkeeper who's going to be our number one every week needs to be getting a palm to that though. It's not quite good enough. It was the only mistake of real note of the game, and Dunfermline took advantage of it. That's credit to them. That's not really something you can keep harping on and blaming any individual or group of Hearts players for. The response was what it needed to be at the end of the day. It took a while, but we got there.
Yeah, it certainly did. I think the thing I will say about the Dunfermline goal as well, it was more the actions off the pitch that I quite enjoyed, and you'll know where I'm going with this. But the Dunfermline fans brought a very good following through with them. To be fair, they I couldn't tell you how many tickets they actually sold, but the away end looked pretty packed out, which obviously helped by the weather. And they made a decent noise. They were definitely present in the game, as was their manager Neil Lennon, standing on the touchline wearing a puffer jacket in 25-degree heat. So I hope that he had his Lynx Africa with him, because it would have been absolutely stinking. He obviously, when Dunfermline scored their equaliser, now I have my thoughts on Neil Lennon. I don't particularly like the man, but do you know what? He's been through a hell of a lot in his managerial career, and he plays the pantomime villain very well when he comes to Tynecastle, to the point of he loves to dish it out, but he's not so good at taking it back when it comes back around to him, and I'll touch on that as we go. But obviously when the Dunfermline goal goes in, he turns around and does a crying gesture to the main stand, which again I kind of laughed about. I thought, you know what, fair play, you've obviously been getting it tight from Hearts fans behind you, so fine. Do you know what, you've scored a goal, you've equalised, that's all right. Like, I'll let you have that. I can say that now based off the final result. But I like I say, not many people in football deserve the abuse and the stuff that Neil Lennon has had throughout his career. When you talk about getting sent things in the post by opposition fans and stuff, like, nobody deserves that. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of Neil Lennon, and I don't encourage any of that sort of behaviour. But I almost like when he comes to Tynecastle, because he's going to be up for it, and he's going to just be a wind-up merchant, but also inevitably at the end he's going to be sitting on the bench having a cry at full time because his team's been beaten. And that kind of was what happened. But did you have, obviously half-time came and went, did you have any other thoughts on the first half that you wanted to kind of touch on before we speak about the main events in the second half?
I was really pleased to see a normal amount of stoppage time again. That was a really refreshing thing. If I wasn't in favour of getting rid of VAR before, I think I am definitely now. It was a pretty decent, entertaining first half of football. Hearts in spells were very energetic. They came out of the blocks pretty fast. Obviously, that died off a bit. Again, the heat, I think, definitely played an aspect in that. And we were up against a fairly decent team. Like Dunfermline are not a terrible team by any stretch. You had Chris Kane on the field, and he's historically had a bit of a knack of causing Hearts to have a bad day. That wasn't the case this past Saturday. I don't recall him doing much of note, but decent first half. And to your point about Neil Lennon, to borrow one of Ewan's favourite words, shithousery like that is something that we need much more of in Scottish football. You need that sort of thing from rivalries, rather than all the kind of sectarian pish and all the personal attacks.
Yeah,
I don't like Neil Lennon, but I like him as a rival because he's just a bam up merchant, and we usually beat him as well, so that makes it even better.
Yeah, definitely. I think just before we kind of move into the second half, the point that I wanted to sort of bring up as well was things that kind of struck me about the first half, and I'll keep it brief, was the sort of the willingness to go long, the willingness to go direct when there wasn't another option on. I kind of, we spoke about Derek McInnes when he first got the Hearts job and spoke about his style of play and stuff, and some people might not like it and some people might find it a bit, boring to watch, but there was definitely signs of that. Get the ball forward at the earliest opportunity, and I think Ocean McEntee was one that had a few long balls down the right hand side looking for Forrest, trying to get him in behind the fullback, and it worked on a few occasions. So it was kind of nice to see that, rather than sort of sideways and backwards and kind of dicking about with it. It was like, you know what, if the opportunity is there to go long, try a diagonal pass to a winger, try to get it forward, try to lump it up to Shankland and play off him. We had a few moments like that in the first half and in the second half. So there's definitely signs of that, which is nice. Nice to see anyway. Obviously, you spoke about the fact that we kind of faded a little bit. I don't think it can be forgotten that this was the first game of the season,
Yeah.
the first competitive game of the season. There will still be a lot of ring rust in a lot of those players in terms of playing at that intensity. We played a pre-season friendly against, was it Crawley? Crawley Town over in Spain.
Yeah.
And apparently that was quite a tasty fixture in terms of tackles flying in and in terms of intensity. So I think that maybe mirrored what we saw against Dunfermline, which is my point about the pre-season being quite appropriate for us in terms of our opening fixtures. You could probably draw parallels between the Crawley and the Dunfermline tie. So there's elements of that, but there was definitely ring rust in some of the players. But heading in at halftime, obviously 1-1, it's not what you want. You want obviously Hearts to turn up in the first 25 minutes, rattle in 3 goals, and then you're sitting in the sunshine getting having a sunbathe for the rest of the game. But obviously Hearts don't do things like that. Or we certainly haven't for a very, very long time. But the second half began, and it was a little bit more of the same, if I'm honest with you. I wasn't overly bothered. I watched the game back, and we had moments, we had chances, but yeah, it just felt a bit dull. And Derek McInnes mentioned that he was happy with the first 20 minutes, I think it was, the first 25 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes. But the period in between that was a bit of a slog. And you can obviously put that down to the fact that Dunfermline made it such, but we certainly dropped our levels a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. I felt like the second half until that last 15 minutes, it wasn't like a stop. It wasn't stop start in any way, shape, or form. It kept moving. The game kept moving. I feel like throughout, it just didn't necessarily go anywhere. It didn't reach any sort of destination for the vast majority of the time. It was just kind of going in circles. I think at this point, it's probably worth mentioning something you were talking about off air before we started, and that's the referee, who I believe his name is Lloyd Wilson.
Yeah.
I felt like he did a really good job of letting the game flow. I think maybe the absence of VAR took a bit of the pressure off his shoulders to make decisions constantly. And when there was a sort of doubt about a decision, he just decided not to make one. He just decided, we'll let the game keep going. He
Yeah.
punished, I feel, actual fouls like pretty well. I thought he did a really good job overall. I think both penalty shouts that were made were absolutely perfectly valid penalty shouts. I don't think there was a single bit of controversy that I can think of with the referee, and that is so refreshing. Like you said earlier, the best referees, you can't pick them out of a lineup because they don't get noticed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're absolutely right. Like it was refreshing to not have VAR. It was refreshing to not need to worry when the referee points to the penalty spot that you're going to have to wait for some wee man in a
Yeah,
box in Glasgow to say, actually, he was offside by a fingernail, so the penalty doesn't count, or anything like that. It was very, very nice to have that, and hopefully, hopefully that's something that we get a few more of, because it was
yeah,
quite nice. But just prior to the penalties, we had a couple of tactical swaps from Derek McInnes. He went to a back three. He brought on Borchiovic for Ocean McEntee, and he also brought on Blair Spittle for Claudio Braga. Alan Forrest moving to left wing back, utilising his versatility. Alan Forrest for Ballon d'Or. And I felt, even if the back three is not a shape that I particularly enjoy, but we do have the personnel to play it. Harry Milne just shuffled into the back three alongside Halkett and Kent, and obviously Forrest and Borkovic down the flanks. I liked what I saw from Borkovic. There was a point where he had a shot from distance, which is something that a lot of our players seem allergic to, so it was nice to see that. Claudio Braga had one as well, but he skied over the bar. I think that was in the first half. Yeah, it just shows, we have options to be able to change the system. And McInnes, I think it was, mentioned it after the game, kind of talked about having the players with the versatility to do that is a positive. And obviously, we get the first penalty thanks to Alan Forrest running down the left hand side. The ball breaks to him after a bit of a calamity from Dunfermline, and he goes round the goalkeeper, and the goalkeeper stupidly comes out and wipes him out. I never understand why goalkeepers do that. Alan Forrest was going wide of the goal. He wasn't through on goal. Like, he's gone round him, or he's gone to go round him, but he's closer to the corner flag than he is to the goal. And the goalkeeper just decides he's taking him out, which obviously I was delighted about because it gave us a penalty and allowed new signing Lauren Shankland, the unpaid new
Yeah.
Lauren Shankland. Um,
He looks a player, that boy, doesn't he? Couple
I
goals
don't
in
know
his
where we found
debut.
them. I don't know where we found them, but he certainly does. He certainly does.
I'm
Bold
pretty
and
sure
McInnes.
he played for United at one point, and he played in Belgium years ago. But I can't mind what he's been up to since.
Yeah, no, you're right. It was certainly it's nice to see a new signing making an impact like that in the first game of the season. But he steps up obviously and rolls the penalty into the bottom left corner. Just a typical Lauren Shanklin penalty. I saw something, I can't remember what the stat was, but I think it's something like 19 penalties scored in 23 or something like that, or it might even be more than that now. I can't quite remember off
Yeah.
the top of my head.
Well, it was
Um,
15 or 16 in a row, remember? Starting
yeah,
his
he
career at
did.
Hearts.
He's certainly got that in his locker, and it was nice to see him get that opportunity. He obviously had a few chances during the game, but for him to be given the penalty, and it's good for your number 9 to get off the mark early, and the two penalties would have given him confidence for that, and it obviously opens his goal scoring account early this season. For a man that's targeting 100 goals for Hearts, he's now 30 goals short of it. So I look
Could
forward
do it this
to
year.
him scoring in the Scottish Cup final to win it for us, to secure the treble for Heart Midlothian. But yeah, no, it was like I say, it was a typical Lauren Shanklin penalty, and there was almost an inevitability about him scoring it. So yeah, that kind of took the pressure off a little bit. I think there was sighs of relief more than anything else, because the game looked like it was going to be a draw at that point. It looked as if it was going to be, dragged into that ridiculously pointless bonus point penalty shootout at the end of these games when you draw, which is just something that just totally confuses me. Like,
Get that in the bin.
I don't understand it. Like, I don't get it. But yeah, it was nice to see that we didn't need that, and obviously Shankland scoring the penalty. The second penalty followed not long after that. Elton Kabangu had been brought on for James Wilson. At the same time, obviously, Callum Neuenhoff came on for Cammy Devlin. I want to touch on him as well, because I thought he was very good when he came on, as was Kabangu, and his kind of one of his first involvements really was winning the penalty. Now, I know you said it to me off air, so I'll kind of let you give your thoughts on it, but I thought Kabangu did well to win it. He showed that direct running and that sort of ability to take somebody on. But I'll let you give your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, correctly given. It's a soft penalty, I think, in some ways, and I do sort of feel slightly sorry for Kyle Benedictus. The guy looked like he was blowing out his arse by that point in the game. He looked completely exhausted, just a lazy leg, sort of thigh meets thigh, and Kabangu doesn't even go down. And a lot of times, even like more experienced officials would probably not have given that in that situation. Where he doesn't go down, and it's not there's no studs involved in anything like that. It's just kind of like it's almost like a hip check type thing, where Kabangu doesn't even hit the ground. So well done by Kabangu to get around him and to win the penalty for sure. Yeah, slightly soft.
Fair. But again, obviously, the inevitable number 9, as Hearts have referred to him as, steps up and takes another penalty. Now, I always kind of wonder when a player takes a second penalty in a game. I'm thinking, right, what's he going to do? Is he going to put it in the same place as the one he scored, or is he going to think, right, the goalkeeper's probably going to go that way because that's the way I went last time? Do I put it in the opposite corner? And I don't know what I would do if I was in that scenario or if I was in that situation. But thankfully, Lauren Shanklin went exactly the same way as he did for the first one, and the goalkeeper went exactly the same way as he did for the first one as well. And that took it to 3-1, which kind of led to a chorus from the stands that were open at Tynecastle of serenading Neil Lennon for his, his abilities. I'm trying to keep it as PG as possible, so I'm not going to repeat it. But yeah, if you were there, and if you've seen the clips of it, you'll know about that too. it certainly led to Neil Lennon sitting on the touchline in the dugout, just feeling a wee bit daft, feeling a wee bit sorry for himself. And
he did the old Leonardo DiCaprio at Jeff Bezos' wedding at one point, with the cap covering his
yeah,
face. He was so ashamed.
he also apparently, I didn't see it, but I don't know if there was video evidence of it. I don't know if it was caught on camera, but apparently he took his hat off and chucked it in the dugout at 3-1 as well. So I quite enjoyed that. If that
Yeah.
if that is in fact correct, I'd quite enjoy that. But yeah, like at that point, 3-1, the game's wrapped up, and you're thinking, right, do you know what? As average a performance as it's been, it's a scoreline that's acceptable, and obviously goal difference in the group stages might help. Obviously, it shouldn't, because we should be winning all the games that we play realistically. But if you want to score goals, that breeds confidence, and that helps. And the game was rounded off with the man that puts on a show, and people seem to write him off and have already written him off. In fact, if it was for some people, again, that I've interacted with on social medias over the last few weeks, he would probably be playing for Falkirk right now. But Stephen Kingsley comes on and scores from a set piece. We have a new set piece coach in the building whose name escapes me. That screams of a set piece routine to me. And, all the players, the way they're set up, they sort of push towards the front post, leaving Stephen Kingsley kind of on his own. Obviously, he had a marker, but he managed to evade him. And Stephen Kingsley just hooks it back across the goal, back where it came from. It's a sweet volley, and it goes in the back of the net. I love Stephen Kingsley. He's another one that's in the Alan Forrest camp for me. I understand why people are maybe thinking we need to look beyond him, and I get that. But Stephen Kingsley is experienced. He's a professional. He's been at Hearts for a while now. He knows what it's about. I think he's at the stage of his career where he might go, do you know what, if I'm going to be a bench option, if I'm going to be a backup option, that's fine. He might want to go and play. He might want to go and play more minutes. But realistically, there might be a case of, I'm earning a decent wage here. If I have to be a backup, that's what I'll do. I'll just make an impact when I come on. And he certainly did that with the fourth goal. I know, obviously, as I said, the game was kind of wrapped up by that point. But it's a nice wee cherry on the top of the cake, isn't it?
Yes. If I had a pound for every time Stephen Kingsley has been done, according to the Hearts fan base, I wouldn't be a rich man, but I'm pretty sure I could probably afford a couple of cheap frozen pizzas, and I would eat heartily that night. It's great to see him on the score sheet. The professionalism he's carrying himself with, the fact that he's adapting to this kind of new role of being more of a backup player so graciously, and still putting up such an effort, despite the fact he's had personal problems, he's had injuries and stuff like that in the last couple of years that have hampered his playing time. He just shows up whenever you ask him to put the shirt on. He just goes out there, he gives his full effort, and he's been rewarded really well here. And hopefully that means that he'll get some contention for a start here and there. After the way that Harry Milne played, it might not be at left back, but he got on the field for a bit, and he managed to make an impact with the time that he had, and that's what it's all about really as a squad player, is maximising your minutes. Because if you keep maximising the minutes you get as a squad player, if one of the starters is slumping, one of the starters gets a knock, that's all it can take to get you a start, and then you can then show what you've got over the course of 90. That's the way it works, And I feel to go back to the James Wilson thing and him starting over Cabangu, it's up to Cabangu as a more experienced player and a more proven goal scorer to get back to that and knock Wilson out of that spot when he gets a chance to. They call it competition for places for a reason, and Kingsley certainly showed that he's here to compete this year.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's your point about sort of the squad situation and the setup and stuff, and I'll link it back to Alan Forrest. I promise I'm not going to talk about him constantly, but with the imminent arrival of Saba Kerjota and Pierre Landry Kabori, I have not just looked up both those players to ensure I got their names right, I promise. With those two coming in, that could, and probably, I'm not going to say should, but that probably will signal Alan Forrest kind of moving down the pecking order a little bit. But like you've just said about Stephen Kingsley, having players that are willing to accept that, but also not willing to accept it, if that makes sense. Like, they're happy to be a backup option, but they're also at the point where they can push and be like, well, actually, I want to be playing every week, but if I'm not, it's fine. that might be what Alan Forrest's future looks like, or who knows? When the transfer window shuts at the end at the end of August, he might not be at the club anymore. If he's not, then I will not be on this podcast anymore. That's the day that I retire from Since I Was Young. It is the day that Alan Forrest leaves Hearts. But having players like that is helpful. But Derek McInnes spoke about the two incomings, or the two pending incomings. They were both at Tynecastle. They both watched the game from the stand. I think it's a case of the sort of legal processes and work permits and such because of where they've come from and the leagues that they were playing in. I think it's just a formality. But who knows? They may well be in the building for the next game, or perhaps the game at the weekend that follows it. Because having options and having different players and these League Cup group stages is good because of that. Yes, we have a big squad at the moment, but Derek McInnes addressed that and said, he's not pushing anybody out the door at the moment because he doesn't need to right now. Yes, we have a big squad, but Derek McInnes is quite happy with that at this moment. I think if we start against Aberdeen and we've still got a 30-man squad, there might be some things to say about that. There probably will be one or two that leave, but I read somewhere Aidan Denham, for example, has said that he wants to complete pre-season with Hearts. He wants to obviously stay and train and use the facilities, and then potentially look for a loan after that, which I don't blame him at all. If you've got the use of these facilities, and he might get some minutes in the League Cup group stages, depending on his fitness, there's nothing wrong with that. We've obviously already loaned out Lewis Nielsen and the backup goalkeeper, McFarlane. He's already gone out on loan as well. So there's been some movement, and I'm sure there'll be some more. But it's the League Cup group stage. I know Derek McInnes spoke about it and said, this is not just an extension of pre-season. These are important games. With all that said, there is still that element of you can rotate the squad because you have to, because we've got obviously a weekend, a midweek, a weekend, a midweek. Feels like we're back in Europe again, when in reality we're just going to Hamilton. But yeah, it's
not even. It'll be Broadwood that they're going to in it. So
true.
Yeah.
I'll put the passport away.
You don't need a passport to go to Hamilton. You just need a bulletproof vest.
Oh dear. Well, with that, let's move on to the Hamilton game. At time of recording, this is Monday afternoon that we're recording this, and obviously the Hamilton game takes place on Tuesday the 15th in the evening. So hopefully this is out prior to that game. If not, then we'll touch on that. But what do you think? How do you feel the Hamilton game is going to pan out? Do you think it'll be another comfortable scoreline, perhaps not a comfortable afternoon?
I think that most of the game will be more like the sort of slugfest that we saw in the middle section of the Dunfermline game. I don't think that Hamilton are going to be an easy team to run all over. They've been embattled in recent times. They are, they're struggling a lot on so many fronts, but they do still have some talented players there, and they are going to make life difficult for Hearts. We obviously go into it as massive favourites, and I would expect Hearts to win, but I would also be prepared, if I was the Hearts support, for it not to be like a 6 or 7-0 drubbing. We might win 2 or 3-0. If I was to plump for a prediction, I would maybe say 3-0. But it's not going to be easy. We're not going to run all over them. Now that I've said that,
I could get behind that.
Hopefully I've jinxed myself, and now that I've said that, we do. But I can imagine that's going to be quite a difficult game. I'm not quite sure what the turf is like at Broadwood Stadium, but I
think it's a synthetic pitch.
Yeah, so it might be quite difficult on the legs as well. So that's another aspect you always have to take into consideration in facilities like that. And also the weather might play a part. Is it going to be roasting hot again, or is it going to be the opposite of that? Is it going to get worse and it's going to be pissing down? If they're playing in the middle of a monsoon, it's going to be a slightly different vibe than we had at the weekend. Yeah. There's so many different factors that go into it. Also, squad selection. Who do we see in from the start? Who do we see come out? It's going to be interesting to see because, like I said earlier, I don't think there was anyone on Saturday that was awful. Everyone was at least just okay, if not really good, as was the case with guys like Harry Milne. Do we see a start for Borchgrevink or any of the other new signings as well? There's so many different aspects of it that will come into play for Derek McInnes when it comes to making the decisions. I do think we'll win. Don't think it's going to be easy, and I'm quite eager to see how much rotation is done and exactly where.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. I think I can't really add much more than that. I think the point that I will make, I think there will be rotation because I think there needs to be. I think we've got a lot of players that need the minutes in the legs, be that for the competitive, the start to the league fixtures, or be that players that want to stay fit to maybe secure a loan or a move elsewhere. That there is that element of it. But yeah, like you, I'm as confident as I'm allowing myself to be, which is something that I said a lot last season, and I didn't expect to say it this early.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think like I said at the start, the hype prior to the Dunfermline game and that new era feel and that vibe was quickly kind of tempered because the game against Dunfermline, let's be honest, for a third of it, we weren't brilliant, but we were lucky that for 2/3 of it, we did the job we had to do. So you want to see that Hearts against Hamilton. You want to see us come out the traps quick and learn and get the job done as early as possible. Because if we are dragged into a slog again, there will be Hearts fans going, "What's changed? Like, what's new about this new era? Like, this is the same as last year." And obviously, you don't want that to happen so early into a season. In fact, you don't want that to happen at all. I do think there will be some rotation. I think Kiziridis obviously didn't get on against Dunfermline, which I was a wee bit surprised about, but it is what it is. He, I would hope, will play against Hamilton. Again, the surface might be dependent on that. I don't know what sort of pitches he's used to playing on. It might cause him a wee bit of difficulty. And that's something that a lot of our new players are going to have to get used to as well, is that sort of change in the surface and the physical nature of the game here. So yeah, it's a tough test to start with. I think Derek McInnes mentioned the Dunfermline game as being the toughest of the games that we'll face in the group stage, and I think he's probably right on that. But Hamilton won't make it easy for us either, or certainly, I don't expect them to. It would be nice if they did, but I don't expect them to. I did throw up a poll on Twitter, and I did the same for the game against Dunfermline. And I'll just quickly rattle through the results of that. The game against Dunfermline, I posted up the poll, and it was 89% in favour of a Hearts win. So our listeners and viewers clearly know what they're talking about. This week's poll, or today's poll, was obviously for the Hamilton game, and it was a 94% for a Hearts win. So confidence is high in the Hearts support, which is always nice to see. I will be running those polls across the social channels across the season, and we'll be referencing them on the podcast as we go along. So yes, hopefully our fan base are as switched on and as accurate as they were for the Dunfermline game, because hopefully it'll be a nice afternoon against Hamilton, and we shall see what happens there. Is there anything else you wanted to add in, John, before we wrap up this week?
I'll tell you what, mate. Might not have been pretty the whole 90 minutes, but Hearts, they coasted against the film.
I like it. I like it. It's such a niche. It's such a niche reference that only like a few people are
The
going to
vast
get.
majority of people who are either watching this or listening to it are not going to have a clue what the fuck I'm talking about, and that's just how I like it.
But the one or two people that will know exactly what you're on about, and that just makes it.
That one guy
yeah,
somewhere is going to be like, yeah, see, works
we
wonders,
take
so it does.
we take feedback and comments on board.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say, folks. On
There's
that,
the
but
proof. The proof is in the pudding right there.
exactly, absolutely, folks. Well, with that wrapped up, as I said, folks, if you are heading to the Hamilton game, enjoy it. Whether it be sunshine, whether it be monsoon, enjoy it. Hopefully, we put on a show and get another win on the board, and hopefully edge closer to getting through the glamorous League Cup group stage. Football's back. It's great, and it's just nice and refreshing. And before we go, I just wanted to say, as per usual, folks, all of our socials, comment below in the video, let us know your thoughts. The engagement that we've had over the last few episodes that we've done has been amazing. Obviously, sadly, Ewan not with us today. Hopefully we'll be back in the not too distant future to steady the ship and steer the ship, because I have not got the foggiest idea what I'm doing. I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, as we say. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, folks, and thanks for coming on for a chat with me, John. It's always appreciated.
Thanks again, Alan, and thanks everybody. I'll just echo what you said. The engagement, the view counts, the comments have all been really nice to see the last few episodes, and so hopefully that can continue, and hopefully people will become more engaged with the podcast as we go through this new season. And I'm looking forward to sitting down with you and again, and the three of us getting to talk some Hearts football. It can't come soon enough.
Absolutely. Well, with all that said and done, thank you so much for watching, folks, and have a good one. We'll be back next week at some point, and we'll keep you posted on the socials as per usual. But thank you so much, folks, and cheerio.